Our first speaker today is Kate Seselja. Her 12-year struggle with gambling addiction to poker machines almost took her life. She now draws upon her lived experience to create positive change through the Hope Project, where she advocates for gambling reform and coaches, educates and inspires others. She's co-chair of the Canberra Gambling Reform Alliance, a member of the Ministerial Advisory Committee to implement new gambling reforms in the ACT. She's been a TEDx speaker, World Kindness Australia Goodwill Ambassador, and has been featured on publications, podcasts and television programs, including The Today Show, the ABC's You Can't Ask That. What a great show is that? And CNN's Vital Signs. Could you welcome her to the lectern, please?
Good morning. Firstly, I too want to pay my respects to the Ngunnawal people, the traditional owners of the land in which we meet. I value their rich wisdom of their leaders past, present and emerging, and honour those present here today. Gambling harm. 2 words I never ever thought would be part of my story. 10 years ago, I'd never even heard anyone say those words. How baffling it was for me to experience something that had no name, yet I'd been experiencing it in some way, shape or form for 15 years. From 97 to 2012, from age 18 to 32. It had no name because it didn't need to have one. It was intentional. That way it could exist as normal, and it was I that was the problem. The stigma and shame carefully cultivated by the gambling industry has been a key component to the exponential spread and dominance of gambling in our communities. If the individual's the problem, then no one is looking at the products. Hence the industry term, problem gambler. I bought into this message wholeheartedly, and so did those around me. What's wrong with me, I thought, as I felt betrayed by my own mind and body. I felt alone and profoundly misunderstood, as Rocket shared yesterday. The truth was there was nothing wrong with me. From a manufacturing standpoint, I was the ideal customer for a machine intentionally designed to addict. The level of shame, self-blame and self-hatred experienced by individuals and their families breaks my heart. The user becomes overwhelmed by the intentional design features like losses disguised as wins. This is where, say you bet $5, the lights and sounds will go off like you've won, but it's only $2. So it celebrates you losing $3 in a way that's registered in your brain as a win. Along with near misses, random rewards, they overwhelm our body's ability to make sense of the engagement. A gambling industry insider once said to me, we intentionally built poker machines as a product that defeats our natural instincts. Addiction by design. I cried at his words. The confirmation of my body hearing the truth and releasing the pain that I once carried of feeling broken beyond repair. What's wrong with me is a question I no longer ask myself. Instead, I ask, why is this still happening? You are not broken, I whisper to people who reach out to me. Everything else is. I'm very proud of the fact that through my advocacy efforts in ACT, the terminology has shifted from problem gambler to gambling harm. Gambling harm is now defined as any negative consequence caused by gambling or made worse by gambling. These negative effects could damage the health and well-being of an individual, their family, or the community. It's part of a public health approach, but we're a long, long way from seeing a real reduction in gambling harm because we do everything else but address it at the source. We are still the #1 gambling nation in the world, meaning we have the most losses per adult population than anywhere else on the planet. We are 40% worse than the nearest closest nation, which is Singapore. Our tiny population of 27 million people loses 26 billion on gambling per year. If we were a nation with the worst stats in literacy, there would be literally mountains of resources thrown at fixing the problem, but not this problem. It's a problem that actually gets budgeted to increase each year as a tax revenue stream. Imagine my horror at learning that this known financial abuse and exploitation of Australians is budgeted and mocked by some as the tax on the stupid. This is not a new or emerging issue as a result of new technology or not enough product research. This is addiction by design, and it's been going on for decades. The first insight I had into that fact was when I shared my lived experience for the first time at an Impact of Gambling roundtable. I stood there shaking and crying the whole time, and then when I sat down, the next speaker stood up. She was a woman nearly 10 years older than me, and she'd grown up on the floor of a club in rural New South Wales. She was the daughter of a woman who gambled. I was shocked by her story because it was jarring to think about, even though my children had never been near a venue, how my journey had impacted the lives of my 6 children. But it was also a moment of rage because this issue, gambling harm, was happening before I was born. It caused harm for decades before I'd even turned 18, and yet I knew nothing of its harms like I did smoking, drinking, and drugs. Needless to say, the experience was cathartic for both of us. My sharing helped her to develop some compassion and understanding for her mother and the mental torment that she'd endured. And it made me switch gears from my recovery journey to how do we need to heal as a family. I became hungry for more roles in advocacy to educate myself on the impacts of trauma, both for myself and for my children. Whilst there's no doubt that trauma and addiction have a relationship, gambling has a unique ability to create trauma via losing money so quickly. With $10 max bets, you can lose $200 a minute. That's $6,000 in a half an hour. And I know because I've done it. The mental bewilderment after that experience, it all happening so rapidly, haunts me. Like Anna said, I could still hear the sounds in my head. You see, many people are just like me. They enter a venue not ever intending to gamble, but just like me, due to access and its prevalence in social spaces, especially if alcohol is on board, can suddenly lead to choices and devastating financial impacts that were never intended. No one just wakes up one day and says, you know what, today I'm going to go get a gambling addiction. For me, without consciously realising it, I was trying to go backwards. To go back to never ever sitting behind a pokey and winning that first time. I tried for so long to fix it on my own. I truly thought that my struggle and all of my experiences had disqualified me from being worthy of anything. Love, trust, value, compassion, forgiveness, understanding. That's how I've known to give it to others. To all the people that I've helped in the last decade through my advocacy and as a recovery coach. My vulnerability creates a pathway for others to connect to their humanness because they feel seen and heard. Giving people who've been impacted by gambling harm a very quick lesson in the whole gambling landscape of our nation goes a long way to helping liberate people from the grip of shame. Once people understand that protections and regulations have been in place always to protect the industry and not the consumer, they too feel a sense of understanding and empowerment, and they seek to create change. Journalists often ask me, what do you want to see happen? And I answer, well, I want to see the playing field levelled. Right now, we aren't even in the same stadium. I want to see education in gambling industry awareness so that consumers can make empowered decisions. Right now, there's not enough product awareness of gambling harm, so people are vulnerable by default. Secondly, I bring the journalists' awareness to the fact that when venues become acutely aware of the level of gambling harm that they are causing their community. They don't just reduce the machines or opening hours, they go pokey free. I think that speaks volumes as a venue-led initiative. It takes the same approach along the lines of smoking, that just like every cigarette does damage, so does every pokey. So I continue my work, self-funded because there is no help, none without strings attached. My advocacy where there is no safe space because the perpetrators of harm are always at the table, paying lip service to their desire to address gambling harm, but refusing to address it at the source. I was alone in the struggle, and I'm alone in the fight. I'm okay with that. I just hope that others will use their voices to bring about change that will clearly never come from the top. I am, as Carlfred Broderick said, a transitional character, a person who in a single generation changes the entire course of their lineage. They find a way to metabolise the pain and poison and refuse to pass it on to their children. Sorry. They break the mould. Their contribution to humanity is to filter out the destructiveness. Sorry, can I just have tissue? Sorry. It's all right.
We've put out a call for tissue.
Sorry.
And take some water if you need to, Kate. You take your time.
Sorry. Their contribution to humanity is to filter out the destructiveness so that generations downstream will have a supportive foundation on which to build productive lives. We can find a way to develop a constructive relationship with the adversity in our lives, but we have to embrace our humanness and be mindful to make sharing our stories not an act of bravery. Because if it's only for the brave, then people will disqualify themselves. My goal is to use my voice to humanise the issue and help restore dignity to a cohort of people whose human vulnerabilities were knowingly exploited for profit. That we shift from being a conditioned culture to an informed collective that values the community well-being over profit with a very real human price tag. In January 2012, as I stared at the nil balance on the pokey I just poured money into for hours, I was done. I was so mentally and physically destroyed from the 15 years since I first sat down. I didn't know how to stop. I tried and failed so many times, but I was asking the wrong question. I kept asking what's wrong with me, without questioning the environment that I was trying to exist in. I almost took my life that evening and become one of the estimated 400 gambling-related suicides that this country never talks about. I thought that I had failed my children, but they didn't need a mother to model perfection. They needed a mother to help them navigate the complexities of life and show them how to fight for people who need help. I'm asking you to help me in that fight and notice the gambling harm that's all around and demand a change to the status quo. We can rethink addiction if we're prepared to be curious with the areas of struggle in our society that we currently don't understand. I invite you to please connect with me on social media and help bring education and awareness to this issue. I welcome any questions that you may have for me this morning as I now live free from shame that was never mine to bear. A shame so toxic that it almost killed me. A shame that always belonged to the knowing perpetrators of gambling harm.
tribe has spoken. Kate, that was amazing. And everyone in this room, a bunch of hardened professionals, as well as a whole lot of people whose own stories are remarkable, have given you a standing ovation. What more needs to be said?